The Galactic Council was a governing body that represented the most advanced and powerful species in the galaxy. Comprising representatives from dozens of different planets, each more ancient and technologically advanced than the last, the Council was a force to be reckoned with. For centuries, they had maintained a delicate balance of peace, keeping the galaxy stable through diplomacy, trade, and the occasional military intervention. But now, there was a growing concern, one that threatened to disrupt this status quo. The heart of this crisis was humanity. Over the last century, humanity had expanded its reach into space at an unprecedented pace. Their scientific and technological advancements, especially in the fields of propulsion, artificial intelligence, and military strategy, were accelerating faster than any of the Council's members had anticipated. What was once a minor player on the galactic stage had suddenly become a potential threat, one that the Council could not ignore. The Council convened in secrecy, gathering in an isolated chamber deep within the heart of the galactic citadel. Representatives from various species took their seats around the large, round table. The atmosphere was heavy with tension, the once invincible authority of the Council now questioned by their own fears of humanity's growing power. In attendance was Gyreth, an older battle-hardened representative of the Quarry, a species known for their deep wisdom and tactical brilliance. Gyreth had watched humanity's rise with a wary eye, and he was one of the few to argue that Earth's population posed a unique and dangerous challenge. "I've studied humanity, their history, their behaviors," Gyreth said, his voice gravely serious. "They are unpredictable, relentless, and above all adaptable. The more we try to control them, the more they will push back. If we do not act now, they will become a force that cannot be contained." Most of the Council representatives were dismissive. The Tavari, a peaceful species that valued diplomacy above all else, was skeptical. "Humans are primitive," the Tavari ambassador argued, his voice calm yet condescending. "Their technology is impressive, but they lack the wisdom of older species. We can easily control them through trade sanctions and political isolation." However, Gyreth's warning resonated with a faction of the Council that understood the importance of foresight. The Vraxians, known for their militaristic nature, had already begun planning for a more extreme approach. "We've seen their military prowess," said the Vraxian representative, his tone cold and calculating. "They are not like any species we've encountered before. If we let them continue unchecked, they may one day rival our own fleets." After much debate, the Council reached a unanimous decision. Humanity would be isolated from the greater galaxy, trade would be restricted, and any attempts to establish off-world colonies beyond a certain point would be blocked. The goal was clear: contain humanity's expansion and technological progress before they became an unstoppable force. But this decision, meant to protect the galaxy, would prove to be the Galactic Council's greatest mistake. What they didn't anticipate was the resilience and ingenuity of humanity. Instead of folding under the pressure, humans would rise to the challenge, something the Council had failed to understand. They underestimated the very quality that had allowed humanity to survive and thrive on their dangerous, unpredictable homeworld: their ability to turn adversity into strength. As the Council members left the chamber, many felt uneasy. They believed they had made the right decision, but there was a lingering doubt that perhaps humanity was more dangerous than they had realized. What they didn't know was that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to their own undoing. In the wake of the Galactic Council's decision to isolate humanity, Earth's leaders did not cower or retreat. Instead, they rallied together, recognizing the threat that had been placed upon them and the resolve they needed to survive, and ultimately, to thrive. The imposition of sanctions, restrictions, and isolation from the broader galaxy only served to fuel humanity's defiance and ignite a fire of innovation and ingenuity that few had anticipated. The story shifts to Captain Juno Reyes, a brilliant and unyielding military strategist who leads a coalition of independent human factions spread across the galaxy. Reyes is not just a military leader, She is a symbol of human determination, embodying the resilience of a species that had survived countless hardships on Earth, wars, natural disasters, and a history steeped in conflict. She quickly emerges as the central figure of the human response to the Council's oppressive actions. Humanity's first response was one of shock and anger, but this soon turned into a focused, methodical effort to break free of the Council's restrictions. Initially, many human colonies felt the weight of the trade blockades and the threats of military action from the galactic superpowers. Resources were limited, and the once thriving economy that had been built on interstellar trade began to crumble. Yet, where others would have faltered, humanity thrived. The hardships led to a surge in ingenuity as humans turned inward, relying on their own ingenuity to overcome the crisis. Human scientists, engineers, and tech moguls quickly began working, in secret developing new technologies that would allow them to bypass the Council's surveillance and restrictions. They created powerful cloaking devices, more advanced than ever stealth ships, and black market communication networks to maintain contact with one another across the galaxy. These underground networks helped maintain the human resistance, connecting disparate factions from all corners of the galaxy. Captain Reyes herself oversaw the development of a prototype weapon that could interfere with galactic communication systems, making it impossible for the Council to monitor human activities effectively. In essence, humans were beginning to make themselves invisible, both literally and metaphorically, to the authority of the Council. While the Council assumed that their restrictions would quickly stifle humanity's efforts, they severely underestimated the resolve and adaptability of the human spirit. Humans, accustomed to dealing with their own limited resources and facing constant adversity on Earth, found ways to thrive under the very pressure that the Galactic Council had hoped would break them. Humanity's military capabilities also underwent a significant transformation. Using stolen technology, salvaged materials, and experimental designs, human ships began to evolve into highly effective war machines. But rather than relying solely on brute force, humans employed their greatest strength, unconventional thinking. While many species in the galaxy relied on predictable strategies and overwhelming firepower, humans developed clever, asymmetrical tactics, using the environment to their advantage. In one notable instance, human forces successfully disrupted a major Council trade convoy using a technique that involved creating a fake distress signal. This lured the convoy into an ambush where human ships equipped with advanced cloaking technology silently picked off the unsuspecting fleet. The result wasn't total destruction, but rather a precise and strategic strike that proved humans could not be easily contained. Despite their success, however, humans were aware that their struggle was just beginning. Captain Reyes and her coalition knew they couldn't remain hidden forever. They needed to make a statement, something that would signal their defiance not only to the Galactic Council, but to the galaxy at large. This led to the decision to strike at the heart of the Council's authority, a move that would send shockwaves throughout the galaxy and force the Council to reconsider their stance on humanity. As the chapter closes, humanity's influence grows, and whispers of their resistance begin to spread. Species that had once dismissed humans as insignificant now began to take notice. The Council's strategy of containment had failed. It had only strengthened humanity's resolve. What began as a struggle for survival was quickly turning into a rebellion that the Council could no longer ignore. The impact of humanity's defiance had begun to reverberate through the galaxy. While the Galactic Council had initially believed their isolation strategy would quash human expansion, the exact opposite had occurred. Humanity, far from being subdued, had proven to be a force more dangerous and unpredictable than the Council had anticipated. The once dismissed species had transformed into a growing insurgent power, one that was making calculated strikes against the Council's authority and proving its resilience and resourcefulness. Amid this escalating tension, a faction within, the Galactic Council began to recognize the critical mistake they had made. The Thalor, an ancient and diplomatic species known for their thoughtful, measured approach to galactic affairs, saw the brewing disaster clearly. The Thalor had long been concerned with maintaining peace and balance within the galaxy, and the sudden antagonism towards humanity struck them as both hasty and unwise. Unlike the Vraxians, who viewed humanity through a lens of militaristic threat, the Thaler believed that humanity's unique potential could be harnessed to benefit the galaxy as a whole, not stifled. This faction, led by the Thaler ambassador Leoran, began to privately campaign for a shift in policy toward humanity. Leoran and his supporters argued that the Council's treatment of humanity was a mistake, one that would lead to a galactic conflict that could tear apart the fragile alliances the Council had worked for centuries to build. Humanity's abilities were not a threat to be contained, but a resource to be understood and integrated into the greater galactic order. They recognized that humanity, given the right guidance and opportunities, could become a key player in maintaining peace and stability in the galaxy. However, the Thaler faction's voice was not enough to sway the Council as a whole. The Council's leadership remained focused on the fear that humanity's rapid technological progress could destabilize their long-held dominance. As a result, humanity continued to be viewed as a dangerous and unpredictable variable, a problem that needed to be neutralized. Meanwhile, human resistance continued to grow stronger. Captain Juno Reyes had become an iconic figure among the galaxy's independent human factions. Under her leadership, a growing fleet of human ships now operated in stealth, using new technology to avoid detection and strike at key Council targets. The tide had turned, and the Council's response to this mounting threat would determine the future of the galaxy. In one bold move, Captain Reyes orchestrated a high-profile raid on a major Council communications hub, seizing critical data that exposed deep fractures within the Council's leadership. The operation was not a conventional military strike. Instead, it was a surgical strike that leveraged humanity's greatest advantage, its creativity and willingness to think outside the box. By infiltrating and disabling the hub's defense systems, Reyes and her team gained access to confidential information that revealed corruption and political infighting among the Council's top members. The data was leaked to the galaxy, shaking the foundations of the Council's authority. This revelation had profound consequences. As news of the leak spread, tensions within the Council escalated. Species that had once supported the Council's isolation of humanity began to question their leaders. The Vraxians, previously staunch in their opposition to humanity, began to see the cracks in the Council's unity. They realized that their rigid stance on humanity was not only undermining their own power, but also alienating other species that were growing sympathetic to humanity's cause. Simultaneously, humanity's allies among neutral species, those who had long remained on the sidelines, began to speak out. The Galactic Council's inability to understand the potential of humanity began to backfire as more factions saw that the Council's decision had sparked an unnecessary conflict. Species that had once feared the Council's power now began to consider the possibility of aligning with humanity. With growing pressure from both within and outside the Council, Leoran and the Thaler faction made one final push. They publicly called for a new approach to humanity, one that would recognize their potential as equals, not subjugates. But the question remained, could the Council ever admit its mistake, or was humanity now too powerful to be contained by their old methods? The chapter ends with the galaxy at a precipice as the power dynamics shift and the future of the Galactic Council hangs in the balance. The Council's greatest mistake had been made, and the galaxy was beginning to realize that humanity was not to be underestimated. The shift in the galaxy's power dynamics had become undeniable. Humanity, far from being isolated or contained, had now emerged as a force to be reckoned with. The once strong authority of the Galactic Council was crumbling, and the leaders of the galaxy began to understand the full extent of the mistake they had made by attempting to suppress humankind. Captain Juno Reyes, now more than just a military commander, had become the symbol of humanity's rise. Under her leadership, humanity had not only survived the Council's blockade, but had begun to dismantle the very structures that had been put in place to control them. The attack on the Council's communications hub had been just the beginning. The galaxy had been rocked by the revelations of corruption and infighting within the Council, and the data leak had sparked a widespread movement of disillusioned species questioning the legitimacy of the Council's rule. Despite the growing fractures, the Galactic Council refused to back down. Their pride and fear of losing power kept them locked in a desperate struggle to retain control. A final ultimatum was issued. Humanity must submit to the Council's authority or face the full force of the galaxy's combined military might. This was their last attempt to reassert their dominance, an attempt that would prove to be as misguided as their original decision to isolate humanity. The threat was bold, but it also exposed a critical flaw. The Council underestimated the depth of humanity's resolve. Rather than cowering in fear, humans rallied behind Reyes and her coalition. They knew the stakes were high, but they also understood that submission was not an option. Humanity's defiance had already set the galaxy on a path that could not be reversed, and they were prepared to take it to the next level. In a final, decisive move, Captain Reyes led a daring strike against a key military stronghold of the Council, the heart of their fleet operations. This was no ordinary assault. It was a demonstration of human innovation at its finest, an embodiment of the very qualities that had made humanity so dangerous to the Council: creativity, resourcefulness, and unyielding determination. Using a combination of advanced stealth, technology, carefully coordinated sabotage, and psychological warfare, the humans crippled the Council's naval fleet, rendering it virtually powerless. The result was staggering. The Council, which had once believed that their superior technology and military might make them untouchable, found themselves humiliated by a species they had sought to control. In the aftermath of the attack, the once unified Council began to fracture even further. Species that had supported the Council's stance on humanity now began to reconsider their position. They saw that humanity was not just a threat but a potential ally, one whose power could either destabilize the galaxy further or be channeled toward a more balanced future. As the galaxy watched, humanity began to make its demands known. They would not be subjugated. They would not be contained. The message was clear. Humanity was not a force to be ignored or controlled. The era of the Galactic Council's unchecked authority was over. Captain Reyes delivered a defiant speech, broadcast across the galaxy for all to hear. The Council's greatest mistake, she proclaimed, was believing that you could cage the human spirit. We will not be contained. We will not bend to your will. The galaxy must recognize that humanity's place is not beneath you, but alongside you. It was a challenge to the entire galaxy, a call for a new era of cooperation or conflict. The story ends with the Council facing its own collapse. The final blow to their authority had been struck, and the galaxy stood on the precipice of a new era, one in which humanity would play a pivotal role. The decision to isolate humanity had been the Council's greatest mistake, and now the consequences were clear. The once powerful governing body was no longer the uncontested ruler of the galaxy. Humanity, a species once considered too dangerous to contain, had become its most powerful new player.